first question is, what prompted you to visit Hungary for the first time?
Well, I've been traveling the world talking about these subjects for nearly 30 years. And so I've visited a lot of countries. And most of the time, up to this point, it's been through invitation. So the reason I haven't been to Hungary up to this point is that I wasn't asked. But things have changed very rapidly in the last 3 years or so, where the interest in the information that I'm putting out has just exploded. And therefore, I'm speaking in more and more places. And I'm very, very keen to come to Hungary. I've been to the countries all around Hungary. But I'm very keen to come to Hungary because, not least of the highlighting of the manipulation extraordinaire in extremis of George Soros, of course, was born in Hungary. Because I've been tracking this man for 3 decades, and how he is using his Open Society Foundation networks to manipulate events and political decision making, not just across Europe, but also in North America. And basically what Soros has done with his billions, and let's put into context the amount of money we're talking about. The total now that he has transferred to the Open Society Foundations is $32 billion. Now, when you're dealing in that sort of money, you can buy a lot of support, and you can fund a lot of organizations. And when you are someone like me who's been tracking Soros, it never ceases to amaze how many organizations of a certain kind are recipients of his money. And with money comes influence, and if it's enough money, comes control. And so people need to ask, and this is why I'm so pleased it is being asked in Hungary, what the agenda of Soros is and who's he really working for. And I did drop across the border when I was speaking in another country. I think it was Slovenia, I think. And saw the posters everywhere, which is kind of unprecedented. And you know, I'm not saying that I support everything that Viktor Orbán and his government does. I'm sure I don't. But on Soros, he's absolutely right.
Nagyon sok embernek ezek nagyon kedves szavak, amiket ő mond Magyarországon, de amikor a Soros-féle elve, ami azt mondja, hogy az egész világ eladó, hát csak az árakon vitatkozunk, akkor ezt milyen módon lehet az emberek fejében megfordítani, akik úgy vannak már programozva a média és minden által, hogy az életüket, erköltséget, mindent eladtak már.
And what you're saying is very pleasing to a lot of ears that you're saying, but when there's the Soros principle of everything in the world is for sale, we're just negotiating the price, how can we change the people's minds who have been programmed by the media to sell their life, sell their values, sell their ethics for money?
Well, all you can do to make a difference is do what the media do to the best of your ability. What the media do is repeat the official story of everything. They repeat the official narrative, and where people come to power who are not speaking the official narrative, then the media try to undermine them. So what they're doing is seeking through the media to control the perceptions of the people. People's perceptions of themselves, of the world, of their country, of events dictate their actions. Everything comes from perception. So where does perception come from? It comes from the information you receive. This information can come in the form of a personal experience, or it can come from a newspaper or the television news. The point is, if you can control the information that people receive, then you are going to a very, very large extent, in many cases in its totality, you are going to dictate their perceptions. So what we in the independent media are seeking to do is get out to as many people as we can. Obviously we don't have the mainstream networks, but as the best that we can, to put out information that challenges that official narrative that's parroted 24/7 by the mainstream media. That's what we need to do. And you know, I can only say from my own experience, especially since I've been on a world speaking tour virtually non-stop since 2016, and that is when people hear the information put together in a way that connects dots and situations and people that are not normally connected, then the pennies drop and people's perceptions change. I think, you know, one of the important things that the independent media need to do, and it's something that I focus on primarily, and that is that we don't need to just talk about why a certain event is not happening in the way that the official story tells us. We have to also connect that event to other events and other people and other organizations, because the big question that people have is this: if a few people are manipulating human society, which they are, how can that be possible? How can they do it? You know, there's billions of people in the world. How can you manipulate all those people through just a few? Well, once it's explained how it's possible, because there's a global structure that makes it possible, then people's minds open to the fact that it's happening. But before that structure is explained, you know, people might say, well, yeah, well, the official story of this doesn't make sense and that doesn't make sense, but I mean, what's going on? How can it be all coordinated? Well, it can be through the structure that's very easy to explain, and I'll explain it when I come to Hungary. Once people see this alternative way of looking at the world then starts to make sense in a way that it doesn't if you believe the official versions. And it's this process that I'm seeing happening to more and more people. Once they get access to this other explanation, then they say, well, actually, that makes more sense than the one I've been given. In fact, so many things that don't make sense from the official version of everything do make sense now. So, you know, it's a process of just getting out and circulating the information as much as we can, because it has the power to make people or get people to look at the world in another way, from a different angle, if we can get access to it. And that, of course, is why we're seeing this increasing censorship globally on the information that is challenging the official stories. We're seeing this with Facebook, we're seeing this with Google and Twitter, because these organizations are not just private corporations. They are front organizations for the military-industrial intelligence complex. And when you look at, for instance, I've just come back from Silicon Valley, funnily enough, and it's a very small area compared to the United States, and a tiny, tiny area compared to the world, but through that small amount of land comes the communication of information on a vast scale to people globally, and the ability to decide what that information is. So if we just think about it, you are the military-industrial intelligence complex. What do you want? A, you want to gather as much fine detail information on people's lives as you possibly can. Well, that is done by Facebook and Google and Twitter and all these others. You also want to control the information that people receive and suppress information you don't want them to receive, because you are seeking to use information to dictate the perceptions of the population, perceptions that suit you. Well, Facebook, Google, Twitter, and all these people now are increasingly, blatantly, YouTube too, of course, owned by Google, are increasingly dictating what information people can and cannot see. And then you go to number 3, and that's the big agenda, which is to connect the human mind to artificial intelligence, which is the big endgame agenda of the military-industrial intelligence complex, not least through organizations like DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, and InQtel, the technological development arm of the CIA. And here you have, just by coincidence, that people like Facebook, Google, and these other major players in Silicon Valley are at the forefront of this AI agenda. So everything that this military-industrial intelligence complex wants is being provided by Silicon Valley. Now, if you're naive and you believe everything the government tells you, then you'll say that's a coincidence. If you have any ability at all to look at this situation dispassionately, with an open mind, you'll see that Silicon Valley is providing absolutely everything that the military-industrial intelligence complex wants, and in terms of the subject we're talking about now, crucially, it's increasingly controlling the information that people receive.
Miután megismertem az első könyveit, azóta az én fejemben úgy működik, mint egy ébresztő óra, aki az embereket ébreszti, és szerintem mi az a kritikus tömeg, aminek fel kell ébredni, akik megtapasztalják a valami igazságot ahhoz, hogy ezeket az erőket kompenzálni lehessen, és ezt az egész mérleget átbillenteni és felébredt társadalomra.
Since I got to know your first book, you always been like a wake-up alarm for me, who wakes people up. What is it, do you think, is the critical mass of people who need to know the real truth so that a true shift in consciousness can happen?
Well, obviously, a lot of people, but an individual transformation of consciousness and perception can happen anytime people choose to allow it to happen. And I would say this, and you know, like I say, I've been doing this for 30 years, and there have been some very, very dark times when you looked at what was happening and thought, you know, what's the point? But something drives you on, even though, you know, you can't see where it's going. But since 2016, when I've been on this world tour, and it literally is a world tour all around the world, so many countries, many of whom I've not been to before, what I've seen is an incredible change taking place, not just in the number of people who are willing to open their minds to other possibilities for the first time, but the kind of people. The feedback I'm getting more and more now is from people who are in the system, from people who are of the system. See, people need to appreciate that everything, whether it's a school, a university, a corporation, or a government, and the greatest example is a secret society. They are compartmentalized. In other words, the different levels of them don't know what the higher levels know. So every organization's like this. You might be working for a corporation. You don't know what's being decided in the boardroom or by the CEO. You only know enough about that corporation to do your particular job, make your contribution. You don't know how it all fits together and how your contribution, which can seem innocent and fine in and of itself, looks anything but fine and innocent when it's connected to other contributions from other people who don't know how their contribution connects to everyone else's. This is how it's done. This is how the few keep from the many what's happening. And it's the same in government, it's the same in banking, it's the same in education and science and medicine. And so what I'm seeing now, which is incredibly encouraging, is that putting this information out into the public domain 24/7, day after day, week after week, is starting to show fruits in the sense of people within the system who've been compartmentalized from what's actually happening are now seeing how it all fits together, and they're realizing that their contributions are actually adding to something they didn't really understand before was going on, but increasingly they do, and they are starting to rebel. So there are many encouraging things happening, and we've just got to push on because, you know, I've used this analogy many times over the years, and it's very apt. If you've got a dam holding back a great body of water, then it can take a very, very, very long time for that dam to burst, for that dam to fall. But from the point that cracks start appearing in the dam to the point that it falls can be very, very short. And what I'm seeing now increasingly, and this is why the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitters and all these others are so desperate to censor and suppress alternative information, I'm seeing the cracks appearing. And the cracks are appearing not least in people who are, if you like, have spent their life supporting the dam, being part of the dam, actually seeing it for what it is. So, you know, people shouldn't judge what is possible by the time scale of how long it's taken to get here, because things can move very quickly once we reach what you call critical mass. And what is that? Well, we'll find out when it happens.
Igazából reggelig tudnánk beszélgetni, annyi jó kérdés van. Nagyon várjuk őt Magyarországra októberben. Reméljük, hogy akkor személyesen a stúdiónkban is vendégét tudjuk látni. Egy utolsó kérdésem van, amit úgy nap mint nap felteszek magamnak, hogy mi van akkor, ha ez az elit, aki manipulálja itt a több milliárd embert, egy szép napon ugyanúgy felébred és tudatosul. Ez milyen világ lesz ez, amikor rájön, hogy csak egyetlen egy igazság van az ő számára és a szeretet a rabszolgatartás helyett?
There are so many great questions that I'm sure we could converse till the morning. We are very looking forward to you visiting us in Hungary. I hope we will have the opportunity for you to visit our TV studio personally, so we can do another recording.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. Make a date of that.
I would have one last question that I ask myself every day is what will happen if the elite that is controlling the masses will wake up one day and be conscious and realize that there is only infinite love is the only truth and everything else is an illusion. What kind of world will that be?
Well, it would be everything that this world isn't. You see, when you look at people, even in this program perceptual state, most people just want to live their lives in some sort of prosperity where they're not hungry, or they have a decent home, and their family are looked after, and that there is peace, there is not conflict, and there's not suffering, and there's not deprivation. Now, when you do the research into how this global cabal works, those things that most people, the vast majority of people, would like to rid the world of are being systematically imposed because the system is rigged to make those things happen. Because they want the mass of the people in perceptual servitude, economic servitude, and political servitude, so that the few can control everyone else. So if you had a situation where this cabal, which in its psychological state is what we call psychopathic, they are psychopaths. And psychopaths, if you look at the traits of psychopaths, they have no capacity for empathy, first of all. This means that they have no emotional consequence, no matter what the suffering of the people as a result of their actions. So when you don't have empathy and no emotional consequence, there are no limits to what you would do. This is why some of the absolutely grotesque things happen in the world, because the world is run by psychopaths. Another trait of a psychopath is that they are pathological liars, and of course politics in particular, but the system in general, is infamous for constantly lying to the people. So all these things would disappear if this cabal became conscious, because once you become conscious beyond programmed mind, you realize that all these labels we give ourselves, whether it's black or white or Muslim or Jew or rich or poor, man, woman, and the nature of our country and culture, they are labels for experiences that our consciousness is currently having. They are not who we are. They are an experience, very brief experience, for our consciousness which is basically a point of attention, a point of observation within one infinite consciousness of which we are all a part. We are all points of attention within this infinite consciousness. Now, when you realize that, how do you divide people? How do you divide people when the penny drops and they realize that we are each other? We are different points of perception in the same consciousness. You can't. So what happens is you get people, program people, to self-identify with the labels. And so you then play men against women, women against transgender, which is happening now, black against white, Muslim against Christian, Muslim against Jew, etc. And it happens all over the world all the time. And then you divide and rule your target population. You get them to go to war with themselves, leaving you, who are holding the strings of all sides, to run the world without exposure and without challenge. And what I've been doing all these years is working down the rabbit hole to find who's holding those strings. And when you do, you see that all the conflict in the world is basically programmed perception in conflict with programmed perception. I am our Christian, therefore I must be I am our at war with this person or that person. I am our a Muslim, so I must be at war with this person. And so it goes on. And so when not only this global cabal awakens to the fact that it's not what it thinks it is, it's not its label, I am our controller, and when the population, crucially, even more importantly, realizes that it's not its labels and therefore it's not the limitation of its labels, then it doesn't really matter, once the population wakes up to that, what this cabal wakes up to or not. Its control is gone, because the cabal's control is founded totally on controlling the perceptions of the people, not least the self-identity of the people in terms of how they see themselves, I am are, etc.